I have thought about that decision many times since. The moment I said yes, it wasn't a choice made in light or in darkness, but in the strange, bruised gold twilight of a penthouse that felt less like a home and more like the final perfect seal on a tomb. I didn't cry at my own wedding, years before, to a man I had tried to love. I didn't cry when he left, taking with him what little I had. Crying felt like an extravagance, a waste of water and salt, but in that penthouse with him I felt the phantom ache of tears, a feeling so old and unfamiliar it was like a ghost limb. The first time I saw Kwon Ji-hoon, I didn't know his name. I only knew the way the air in a room rearranged itself around him, particles of dust and light and sound finding a new, more respectful orbit. I was there to catalog his books. That was the official story, the one on the contract I signed with a holding company, whose name was a string of meaningless letters. I was an archivist, a restorer of paper and memory. My specialty was the quiet, steady works of saving things that were falling apart. It was a skill I had perfected on myself. The penthouse was on the 88th floor of a new Blathen tower that sliced the Seoul sky in two. The elevator ride was 47 seconds of pressurized silence. Mr. Choi, the man who had hired me, stood beside me, his own silence a dense, polished thing. He was a man made of straight lines and gray suits, and his stillness was a different dialect of the one his employer spoke. The doors opened not into a foyer, but directly into the view. 3 walls were glass. The city below was an enormous indifferent circuit board, its light moving in ceaseless, silent rivers. The carpet absorbed every footstep like a secret. The air smelled of nothing at all, a curated, expensive emptiness. He was standing by the window, looking down, just a silhouette against the afternoon glare. Mr. Choi cleared his throat, a sound as soft as a page turning. The silhouette turned, and the room, which had felt vast, suddenly had a center. He was younger than I expected. Not a boy, but not yet burdened by the middle-aged sag of power I had seen in other wealthy men. His face was a collection of sharp, beautiful angles, his expression unreadable, not blank, but contained. He wore a simple black shirt, the fabric so fine it seemed to drink the light. He looked at me, and his gaze was not an inquiry. It was a statement. It lasted 2 seconds longer than the conversation required. Then he turned his attention to Mr. Choi. They exchanged no words. Kwon Ji-hoon gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Choi turned to me. The library is this way. I followed him down a long hall of dark, featureless wood. The library was the only room in the apartment that felt real. It was paneled in a warm, dark cherry, and the shelves climbed 2 stories high, accessible by a rolling ladder of black iron. The air here was different. It smelled of old paper, leather, and vanilla. It smelled of time. Mr. Kwon does not like to be disturbed, Mr. Choi said. Your hours are 9 to 5. You will be provided with lunch. A car will be sent for you at 8:30 each morning and will return you home at 5:30. You will speak to no one but me. Understood? I understood. I was a ghost hired to catalog a ghost's library. I nodded. He will not speak to you, Mr. Choi added, as if it were an afterthought. And you was not speak to him. It was a strange command. A man who demanded such absolute silence in his own home. I told myself it was simple. He was as a recluse, a man of immense wealth who craved privacy. I was a functionary, a pair of hands. The arrangement was clean. I was good at being invisible. It was a skill I had learned early and practiced often. I spent the rest of that first day just breathing it in, the quiet, the scent of history. I ran my fingers over the spines of books bound in the 18th century. Treatises on military strategy, collections of royal correspondence, first edition poetry so fragile it felt like holding a dried leaf. It was a collection of staggering value and esoteric taste. At precisely 5 o'clock, I packed my small bag. I walked back down the silent hall. He was there again in the same spot by the window, a glass of something amber in his hand. He didn't turn as I passed behind him. I didn't look at him. But I felt his stillness as a physical pressure against my back, a weight I carried with me all the way down those 88 floors. The car was waiting, as promised, black, silent, anonymous. As it pulled away from the curb, I looked up at the impossible height of the tower. I didn't know yet that I was a book he was collecting. I didn't know he was the one falling apart, and I was the one he had hired to save him. I only knew the silence he left in his wake, a silence that had texture and weight and a faint, lingering scent of nothing at all. 3 weeks passed. They unfolded in a precise and unvarying rhythm. The silent car, the 47-second elevator ride, Mr. Choi's brief nod, the long, quiet hours in the library. I spoke to no one. No one's to me. It was a kind of monastic peace. I lost myself in the delicate work of cataloging, my fingers stained with archival dust, my world shrinking to the dimensions of a single perfect page. I told myself I was happy. I told myself this was enough. Both of those were true, in their way. But a third truth was beginning to form, a small, persistent crystal of unease. He was always there. I would arrive in the morning, and the faint scent of his coffee would hang in the air. I would leave at night, and sometimes catch a glimpse of his shadow moving in the rooms beyond the great hall. But mostly he was an absence that felt like a presence. A pressure in the quiet, then the small things started. On a Tuesday in my fourth week, a tray was waiting for me on the large mahogany desk I used as my workspace. It held a small celadon green teapot, steam ghosting from its spout, and a single matching cup. The tea was a rare first flush green from a specific mountain in Jeju. A type I had once mentioned in passing to a colleague was my favorite. The cost of 100 grams was more than my monthly rent. I looked around the empty library. There was no one. I touched the side of the pot. It was warm. I told myself it was a mistake. A gesture meant for him, left in the wrong room by the unseen household staff. I let it grow cold. The next day it was there again. This time, I drank it. The tea was extraordinary, tasting of spring and rain and a kind of clean, clear loneliness. It felt like drinking the silence of the room. I never saw who brought it. I never saw who cleared it away. It simply appeared, and then it was gone. The car service was another thing. My apartment was in an old, unfashionable part of the city, down a narrow street that was difficult for large cars. On the first day, the driver had to park at the end of the block, and I had to walk. On the third day, I came out to find the narrow street suddenly empty of the usual parked scooters and delivery trucks. The black car was waiting directly in front of my door. It was like that every morning after. The space was just clear, as if the street itself held its breath for my arrival. I asked the driver once, a man as silent as Mr. Choi, "How do you always get to this spot?" He just looked at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes revealing nothing. "It's a good spot," was all he said. Then Kwon Ji-hoon began to appear. Not just as a shadow at the end of the day, but in the library itself. He would enter without a sound. The heavy door would make no noise. I would simply feel a shift in the atmospheric pressure and look up from a 17th century manuscript to find him there. He would be standing by the shelves on the far side of the room, pulling out a book, his back to me. He never looked at me. He never spoke. He would just stand there for 10, sometimes 15 minutes, reading a few pages while standing, then slide the book back into its place. The sound of the spine settling against the shelf was the only proof he had been there at all. The first time it happened, my heart hammered against my ribs for an hour straight, I counted. 6 days of silence passed before he did it again. The third time, he stayed for 21 minutes. I timed it. I told myself he was merely inspecting his collection, ensuring my work was adequate. I knew, even as I thought it, that I was lying. He wasn't inspecting the books, he was observing me. He was watching me in the way a hawk watches a field mouse, not with immediate hunger, but with a deep, patient, and unnerving interest. His presence was a question mark burned into the quiet of my days. One evening late in the second month, I stayed past 5. A complex repair on a scroll painting had me engrossed, and I lost track of time. The sun had set, and the library was filled with the bruised gold of the city lights filtering through the high windows. I was hunched over the scroll, my hands steady, my focus absolute. I didn't hear him enter. I only knew he was there when a shadow fell over my work. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. He was standing at my desk, closer than he had ever been. I could smell the clean, sharp scent of soap and the fainter, warmer scent of his skin. I did not look up. I kept my eyes fixed on the delicate silk fibers of the painting. I could feel his gaze on the top of my head, on my hands. 3 seconds of silence stretched into 10. 10 became 30. I counted each beat of my own pulse. Then he spoke. His voice was low, a quiet rumble that seemed to come from the floorboards. "You have good hands." Just that. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty as a weather report. Then he was gone. The shadow lifted. I heard no footsteps, only the faint final click of the door closing. I sat there for a long time, my own hands trembling slightly. It was the first time he had spoken to me since that first day, and the words, simple as they were, felt like a brand. "You have good hands," past tense, as if he had known it for some time. I packed my things, my movements stiff and strange. The apartment was dark as I walked to the elevator, except for the endless, glittering city below. The silence he left behind this time was different. It was heavier, filled with the echo of his voice. I knew with a certainty that frightened me that nothing was simple anymore. The clean arrangement was broken. A ghost had spoken to me, and I had listened. The rhythm of my days was broken, but a new one established itself. The silence was still there, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was charged, anticipatory. It was a silence that listened. Kwon Ji-hoon began appearing in the library more frequently, sometimes twice a day. He still wouldn't speak, but the space between us had changed. It was no longer a vast empty room but a string stretched taut. He would watch me work. I would pretend not to insist, my focus on the page in front of me so intense it was a physical force. But I saw him in the reflection of the glass-fronted bookcases, a dark, still shapes against the warm wood. I learned the subtle tells of his mood from the way he held his shoulders. The day he stood with them squared and tight for 11 minutes, I knew something in his other world, the world beyond the 88th floor, was wrong. The day a faint, almost imperceptible relaxation came over him as he read a volume of Rilke. I felt my own breath deepen in response, and almost smile. That became a thing I watched for. It was never a real smile. It was a slight upward pull at one corner of his mouth, lasting no more than a second. It arrived and left before it could be confirmed, a trick of the light. I saw it once when I successfully repaired a torn page using a nearly invisible weave of Japanese paper. I glanced at the reflection and it was there, a flicker of approval. It vanished as soon as my eyes met his in the glass. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I told myself it was validation for my work. A master craftsman appreciating his subordinate's skill. I did not allow myself to think it was personal. That would be a dangerous road. My friend Sora called me one night. Her voice was a blast of cheerful, ordinary reality from a life I felt was growing more distant by the day. Minna, are you still working for that weirdo billionaire? Has he mummified you in his pyramid yet? I laughed. A sound that felt rusty in my own throat. I'm fine, Sora. It's just a job. Just a job? You sound like you're calling from the moon. You're so quiet lately. Is he one of those handsome, tortured types from a drama? Does he stare at you across a crowded room? Her teasing was a pinprick in the carefully constructed bubble of my denial. I'm an archivist, I said, my voice measured. I'm there to work on his books. He and I don't interact. It was a lie. We interacted constantly in a language made of silence and proximity in the angle of a shadow. Right, she said, unconvinced. Well, don't let him lock you in the tower. You still owe me for dinner last month. We talked for a few more minutes about her new boyfriend, about a mutual friend's baby, about all the small, normal things that made up a life. When I hung up, the quiet of my small apartment felt different. It felt empty. The silence in the penthouse was full. It was occupied territory. The next day, I found a book lying on my desks. It was not from the collection. It was a slim, modern volume, a collection of poems by a contemporary writer I admired. It was a first edition signed by the author. There was no note. It was just there, lying square in the center of my blotter. My heart did a slow, painful turn in my chest. This was not a pot of tea. This was not a cleared parking space. This was specific. This was me. I had mentioned this poet in my job application essay, a small personal detail I had assumed no one had even read. He had read it. I ran my thumb over the author's signature. I thought about leaving the book, pretending I hadn't seen it. But that was a lie I couldn't manage. I put it in my bag. The weight of it felt enormous. That afternoon he came into the library. He walked to a shelf near my desk, closer than usual. He pulled out a heavy atlas and laid it on a reading stand. He didn't open it. He just rested his hands on the cover. I kept my head down, my pulse a frantic drum against the base of my throat. I had to say something. The silence was becoming a debt I couldn't afford to carry. Thank you, I said. My voice was a whisper. I did not look up. For the book. He didn't move. The silence that followed was dense and heavy, like wool. I thought, for a terrible moment, that I had made a catastrophic mistake, that I had broken the most important rule. Then he spoke, his voice just as quiet. It is a good book. He stayed for another 2 minutes, his hands resting on the closed atlas. Then he turned and left. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was the longest conversation we had ever had, and in it a universe of things had been said. He had seen me, he had listened, and he had, in his own spare and difficult language, answered. The string between us, which had been stretched taut, now hummed with a low, dangerous music. And I knew that I was no longer just the archivist. I was part of the collection. The change, when it came, was subtle at first, a shift in the quality of the silence, like the air changing before a storm. It began with a name, Chairman Yoon. I saw it on a document left face up on a table in the hall. It was a shipping manifest, and the name was next to a red-penned question mark. I knew the name. Yoon Tae-sik was an old money industrialist, a man whose smiling face was often in the financial papers, usually next to headlines about hostile takeovers. He was known for his ruthlessness, a shark who moved in more traditional, corporate waters than the shadowed currents Kwon Ji-hoon seemed to command. I told myself it was none of my business, but the name stuck in my mind, a burr under the skin. A week later, Mr. Choi's demeanor sharpened. His usual gray stillness was now edged with something harder, like granite. The silent drives to and from the tower felt different. I started noticing the car behind us, a nondescript black sedan that seemed to keep a constant, deliberate distance. I counted. It was there for 4 days straight. On the 5th day, it was gone, but its absence was louder than its presence had been. That same week, a package arrived for me at the penthouse. This was unusual. All my correspondence went to my apartment. Mr. Choi brought it to the library himself, placing it on my desk with a pair of tongs, as if it were a venomous snake. It was a simple cardboard box with my name and the tower's address written in blocky, anonymous letters. There was no return address. "Open it," Mr. Choi said. His voice was flat. My hands trembled as I sliced the tape with my letter opener. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a dead canary, a beautiful small yellow bird, its neck broken. Tucked beneath its wing was a small, folded piece of paper. Mr. Choi lifted it out with the tongs. He unfolded it. He didn't show it to me. He just read it, his face impassive. But I saw a muscle jump in his jaw, a single, violent tick. "What is it?" I asked, my voice thin. He refolded the paper and slid it into his pocket. "A mistake." He took the box and its contents and left. A mistake. I knew that was a lie. The image of the small broken bird was seared into my mind. It was a message, a songbird in a gilded cage. It was for him, but it had been sent to me. That evening, Kwon Ji-hoon did not come to the library. The entire penthouse was still with a new predatory tension. When I left at 5:30, Mr. Choi did not just walk me to the elevator. He rode down with me, his hand resting almost casually on the inside of his jacket, where I knew he carried a gun. The 47 seconds of silence were suffocating. He escorted me to the car and spoke to the driver in a low, rapid murmur I couldn't catch. When I got home, the ordinariness of my small apartment felt like a flimsy stage set. I felt watched. I drew all my curtains and sat in the dark, the image of the yellow bird turning over and over in my mind. The next day, I met a woman named Madame Sylvie. Choi had instructed me to attend a private auction preview with her. She was a renowned antiquities dealer from Paris, a woman with eyes the color of old whiskey, and a reputation for knowing everything about everyone in the world of high-stakes collecting. She was, I suspected, one of Kwon Ji-hoon's network of discreetly powerful allies. We walked through the gallery, a cool, white space filled with artifacts under soft lighting. "He has excellent taste," Madame Sylvie said, gesturing to a Korean moon jar on display. "But his most valuable acquisitions are not things." I said nothing, pretending to study the jar's perfect, milky glaze. She gave me a sideways glance, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. She had heard something, or she was guessing. "The most dangerous men," she continued, her voice a low purr, "do not collect what they can buy. They collect what they cannot. Things that are priceless, things that have a life of their own." Her eyes met mine. "You must be very careful, mademoiselle. When a man like that decides he wants to own a song, he will burn down the entire forest to catch the bird." Her words were a cold stone in my stomach. She knew, or she was making a very, very accurate guess. She saw the fear in my face and her expression softened slightly. "Or perhaps," she added, "he is not trying to cage it. Perhaps he is trying to learn its song." She moved on to the next display, leaving me standing there, my blood running cold. Burn down the forest, catch the bird, the dead canary. It all clicked into place. Chairman Yoon. The threat wasn't just to his business, it was to him. And I had been identified as the weak point, the songbird, the thing he is inexplicably valued. That evening I resolved to quit. This was not my world. This was not my fight. I was a restorer of paper, not a player in a silent, deadly game of power. I would go in tomorrow, pack my tools, and leave the key on the desk. I would disappear back into my small, safe, ordinary life. I told myself it was the only sane choice. I told myself I could still walk away. The decision to leave felt like a physical weight lifted. I slept that night, a deep and dreamless sleep for the first time in weeks. I woke with a sense of clarity. I would write a simple, formal resignation letter, citing personal reasons. I would be polite, professional, and gone by noon. The morning was gray and damp, a soft rain slicking the streets. The black car was there, waiting. As I walked towards it, a man stepped out from a narrow alleyway. He was unremarkable, dressed in the gray uniform of a city that was full of such men. But his eyes were wrong. They were flat and empty, and they were fixed on me. He took a step towards me. I froze. My carefully constructed resolve shattered. This was not the penthouse. This was my street, my world. And the danger had followed me home. My driver, the silent man I'd ridden with for months, was out of the car in a flash. He moved with a liquid speed that was terrifying. He put himself between me and the man from the alley without a word, one hand pushing me back towards the door of my building, the other disappearing inside his jacket. "Get inside," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. It was the first time he had ever said more than a handful of words to me. Another man appeared, joining the first. They didn't have guns out, but their intent was a palpable thing, a wave of cold violence. They were flanking my driver, moving to surround him. To surround me. Then Mr. Choi was there. I don't know where he came from. One moment it was 2 against 1. The next he had materialized from a second car that had slid silently to the curb. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the 2 men, and his face was a mask of cold, lethal promise. The 2 men hesitated. They exchanged a look. This was not the simple intimidation they had planned. They had expected one silent driver and a frightened woman. They had not expected this. The standoff lasted for 5 seconds. I counted every single one. 5 seconds in which the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as one, the 2 men turned and walked away, melting back into the city's morning rush. They didn't run, they just left. Mr. Choi watched them go. He turned to me. My face was pale, my hands shaking. The resignation letter was a meaningless piece of paper in my bag. "You will come with me now." It was not a question. I nodded, unable to speak. I got into his car, not my usual one. The driver was new. Mr. Choi sat beside me. The rain began to fall harder, streaking the windows, blurring the city into a watercolor of gray and neon. My small, safe world was gone. The forest was on fire. I had told myself I could walk away, but I had been wrong. The choice was no longer mine to make. Or perhaps I know this now. The choice had been made long ago, when I drank that first cup of tea. We drove not to the tower but to a different building, an older, more discreet skyscraper of dark stone and bronze. We rode an elevator up, this one paneled in dark, polished wood. We stepped out into a suite of offices that were as silent and severe as Mr. Choi himself. This was the heart of the machine, the real one, not the sterile showpiece on the 88th floor. He led me to a door at the end of a corridor. He knocked once, a soft rap of knuckles on wood. A voice from inside, low and calm, said, "Come in." Mr. Choi opened the door and gestured for me to enter. He did not follow. He closed the door behind me, the click of the latch unnervingly loud in the quiet room. Kwon Ji-hoon was sitting behind a massive desk of black granite. The room was not like his penthouse. There were no priceless artifacts, no walls of glass, just one large window behind him showing a sky the color of slate. The room was an office, a place of work, of power. He looked at me, and for the first time his face was not unreadable. There was something there, a cold, controlled anger, and something else beneath it, something that looked almost like fear. But not for himself. "You were not harmed." It was a statement, not a question. The tremor in my hands had not stopped. I clasped them in front of me to still them. "I'm fine," I said, the words automatic, a useless shield. He stared at me, his gaze intense. That phrase. "It means nothing when you say it." I know this now. I was silent. I didn't know what to say. The truth was I was terrified. The truth was I felt a strange and terrible sense of inevitability, as if my whole life had been a long, slow walk to this very room. He stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped a few feet in front of me. "The men this morning. They work for Yoon Tae-sik. He will not stop. He believes you are my weakness. Is he right?" The question hung in the air between us, sharp and dangerous. Is he right? He was asking if I was a liability. He was asking if my presence in his life put him at a disadvantage. But there was another question underneath it, a deeper, more personal one. I met his eyes, and for the first time I didn't look away. "I don't know what I am to you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. Then he took a step closer. He stood before me, the space between us charged with everything that had gone unsaid for months. The pots of tea, the cleared street, the book of poetry, the dead bird. It was all there, in the quiet of the room, in the rain streaking the window behind him. "I will not allow you to be handled," he said. His voice was quiet, but it held an absolute, unshakable certainty. The words were strange. Not harmed, not threatened, handled. As if I were a piece in his game that an opponent was trying to move. The archivist in me, the woman who had built a life on her own quiet competence, bristled. "I am not a piece to be moved on a board," I said, my voice tight. "I will not be managed." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through his eyes. I know. I had braced myself for an argument, for him to assert his power, to tell me what I would and would not do. Instead, he simply agreed. I know. The simplicity of it disarmed me. He saw it. He understood the fierce, stubborn core of my independence, the very thing I had guarded for so long. He took another step. He was close enough now that I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the almost invisible scar that cut through one of his eyebrows. Details that made him real, human. This was not the silhouette against the glass. This was a man. "Stay here," he said, "in this building. The security is absolute. You will not be in danger." It was an offer of protection, a gilded cage far more secure than the penthouse. My old self, the self from that very morning who had written a resignation letter, would have refused, would have run, but running was no longer an option. The fire was at my back. More than that, a strange and powerful current was pulling me forward. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see what was behind this stillness, behind the sparse, carefully chosen words. "What happens to Chairman Yoon?" I asked. "He will be ruined," he said. The words were delivered without heat, a simple declaration of a future that was already written. It is a slow and meticulous process. It is almost complete now. And desperate men are clumsy. They make mistakes. Like sending men to my apartment. Yes, he paused. A mistake I did not anticipate he would make so soon. That was my failing. The admission was startling. He was taking responsibility. He was not blaming you, not blaming me. He was blaming his own lack of foresight. It was an astonishing act of vulnerability from a man who seemed to have none. My anger, my fear began to recede, replaced by a complex and unsettling curiosity. He saw the shift in me. He always saw everything. He lifted a hand slowly, as if not to startle me. He reached out, not to my shoulder, not to my arm, but to my face. His fingers were cool. He gently, so gently, tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was electric, a single point of contact that sent a jolt through my entire body. It was the most tender gesture I had ever received. My breath hitched, his eyes held mine, and the control in them for just a second wavered. I saw something raw and unguarded there, a deep and aching loneliness that mirrored my own. "You came," he said, his voice a low murmur. "On that first day, I knew it would be you." "What did you know?" I whispered. He didn't answer with words. His thumb brushed against my jawline, a feather-light touch that made my knees feel weak. The silence stretched, but it was a new kind of silence. Not tense, not anticipatory. It was intimate. It was a shared space. It cost him something to ask the next question. I could see it in the slight tightening of his jaw. "Your husband, the one who left, did you love him?" The question was so direct, so personal, it should have felt invasive. But it didn't. It felt like he was trying to understand a crucial piece of my history, a part of the book of me that he hadn't been able to read. "No," I said, the truth coming easily. "I thought I could learn to, but I was wrong." He nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed a long-held theory. That was when I made the choice. It wasn't a surrender. It was an act of volition. I was not being kept. I was not being handled. I was choosing to stay. I was choosing to see where this strange, dangerous path would lead. "I will stay," I said, "but not as your prisoner. Not as your weakness." His hand was still on my jaw. He searched my face, and whatever he was looking for, he must have found it. A true, almost smile touched his lips. It was more than a flicker this time. It held. For a full 2 seconds. "No," he said. "Not my weakness." He let his hand drop. The loss of contact was a sudden cold. "I will have Mr. Choi show you to a suite. Rest, we talk more this evening." As I turned to leave, I stopped. I looked back at him. "Ji-hoon," I said. It was the first time I had used his name. It felt momentous, a threshold crossed. He stilled, his back to me. He did not turn around, but I knew he was listening. "Thank you." He inclined his head, a small, formal gesture. The name on my lips had been another statement, an acceptance, an acknowledgement. I had stepped out of the role of archivist and into something new, something unnamed and terrifying and vital. I was no longer just reading his history. I was becoming part of it. That evening he did not summon me, he came to me. The suite Mr. Choi had shown me to was another exercise in quiet monastic luxury. It had none of the sterile perfection of the penthouse. The furniture was comfortable, the colors were warm grays and deep blues. There was even a small shelf of books, all contemporary fiction, all titles I loved. He had known, of course, he had known. I was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-swept city, when he knocked. A single soft rap. I opened the door to find him standing there, holding a tray. On it were 2 bowls of steaming noodle soup and a pot of barley tea. My dinner, he said by way of explanation. I stepped back to let him in. He placed the tray on a low table between 2 armchairs. The gesture was so simple, so domestic. It felt more shocking than the dead bird or the men in the alley. Kwon Ji-hoon, the man who moved markets and ended empires, had brought me dinner. We ate in silence. It was not the charged, watchful silence of the library. It was a comfortable quiet, the kind shared by 2 people who have already said the most important things. The soup was simple and delicious. When we were finished, he pushed the bowls aside. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. He was about to explain. The architect of my new reality was finally going to show me the blueprints. Yoon Tae-suk is the last of the old guard, he began. His empire was built on government corruption, on cruelty and exploitation. My father was one of the men he destroyed. It was a piece of his past, offered up like a rare coin. My father built a small but honest construction company. Yoon wanted it. He couldn't buy it, so he ruined my father's reputation, bankrupted him, and took the pieces for nothing. My father died a year later. He said it all without emotion, his voice a low, steady monotone, but I could feel the history behind it, the cold, patient anger that had fueled him for years. I have spent the last decade dismantling Yoon's empire piece by piece. I took his shipping lines, his media holdings, his political allies. I did it quietly, from the inside, using his own methods against him. Now all that is left is the hollow shell of his parent company. He is trapped. But the final move requires something different. It requires a vulnerability he cannot predict. He looked at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. To destroy him completely, I have to disappear. I have to become the one thing he understands, a failure. I have to go bankrupt. The word hung in the air. Bankrupt. The man who lived on the 88th floor, who owned books worth more than countries, was going to orchestrate his own ruin. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. A feigned death. He will believe it, because it is what he has wanted for years. He will gloat. And in his arrogance, he will overextend himself to pick at my carcass. He will expose the last of his illegal holdings, his hidden accounts, and when he does, the government, the real government that I have been carefully feeding information to for years, will finally have him. It made a kind of perfect, ruthless sense. But where will you go? What will happen to everything? To the company? To the penthouse? To the library? He paused, and I knew this was the heart of it. This was the reason he had brought me soup himself, and it cannot be in Mr. Choi's name, or anyone known to be associated with me. Yoon would be watching them. It must be held by someone with no official connection. Someone who appeared on my payroll as a temporary contractor. Someone the world would see as an insignificant employee left behind in the collapse. Someone, he said, his voice dropping lower, who is beyond reproach. Someone I can trust. The implication was staggering. It settled over me, a weight and a privilege so enormous I could barely breathe. He wasn't asking me to hide with him. He wasn't asking me to be his protected ward. He was asking me to be his fortress. He was asking me to hold his entire world in my hands while he went into the dark to fight his final battle. Everything, he said, answering my unspoken question. Every stock, every holding company, every offshore account, every deed, the penthouse, the library, all of it will be transferred to you. On paper, you will be one of the wealthiest women in the world. In reality, you will be a ghost, living in an empty empire, waiting for my return. The risk, I started to say, is immense. He finished for me, for both of us. If I am discovered, I am dead. If you are exposed, Yoon will come for you with everything he has left. He was not trying to persuade me. He was laying out the facts, the terrible, unvarnished truth. This was the ultimate test of the autonomy I held so dear. He was not commanding me. He was giving me a choice of impossible's magnitude. He was handing me the power to destroy him. All I had to do was take what he gave me and never give it back. He saw the calculation in my eyes, the dawning understanding of the power he was offering. "It is yours if you choose it," he said. "And if you choose to keep it, then it is a price I will have paid." He was placing his life, his legacy, his entire existence in my hands, and trusting me not to close my fist. There is a moment, I know this now, when you stop falling and start choosing to fly. All my life I had made myself small to be safe. I had lived in the margins, quiet and unseen. He was offering me the center, not his center, my own. An empire I would command in his absence. It was the most terrifying and liberating thought I had ever had. I met his gaze. The man who had been a silhouette, a pressure, a ghost. The man who had seen my good hands, who knew my favorite poet, who had admitted his own failings, who had touched my face as if I were made of glass. "I will do it," I said. The words were quiet, but they were the loudest sound I had ever made. A small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaped him. It was the sound of a man who had wagered everything he had on a single Tichkasifal card and had just seen it fall his way. Mine if you choose it, past tense. He had known or hoped what my choice would be. The contract was a choice I was making with my eyes wide open. The days that followed were a blur of quiet, intense activity. I met with lawyers, men with old, tired eyes who spoke in the hushed, respectful tones usually reserved for grieving families or heads of state. They never questioned, they only executed. I signed my name, Minna Kim, on documents thick enough to stop a bullet. My signature, which had once only authorized library book requests and utility bills, was now transferring billions of won, redirecting the flow of global commerce, shifting the ownership of skyscrapers and shipping fleets. My name, plain and simple, became the sole proprietor of Kwon Ji-hoon's world. I did not feel powerful. I felt like a vessel, a carefully chosen container for a force far greater than myself. Ji-hoon was with me for the first few signings. He stood behind me, a silent, reassuring presence. He didn't direct or instruct. He was merely there, a witness to his own dissolution. After the third meeting, he was gone, mister. Choi informed me one morning, his face as impassive as ever. "He has left. The plan is in motion." He left no letter, no final word. He had said everything he needed to say. His trust was his goodbye. The news broke a week later. It was a cataclysm. Kwon Empire collapses. Ji-hoon Kwon, mogul in hiding amidst insolvency. The headlines were brutal, gleeful. The financial world, which had feared and respected him, now turned on him with a vengeance. Pundits who had praised his genius now picked apart his supposed failures. He was a fraud, a flash in the pan. His empire was a house of cards. Chairman Yoon gave a televised interview. He was magnanimous, sorrowful. "A tragedy for the Korean economy," he said, his face a mask of false sympathy. He spoke of the hubris of youth, the dangers of moving too fast. He looked like a vulture circling a fresh kill. And then my name appeared. A minor footnote in the landslide, a low-level archivist, one of the few remaining employees, had apparently been given title to the penthouse apartment in a bizarre final act of largesse. The speculation was ugly and immediate.